There was a study of the Fed recently by the Independent Institute at Oakland, California, and like the board of governors of the Fed, I think they were among the staffers. I think it was 97 Democrats and 3 Republicans. And so now that Trump is going to be president, that's going to turn around. I think they're going to be more realistic, and inflation, they're going to report higher inflation numbers and higher unemployment numbers, which really existed during the Biden administration, but they lied about that because they're Democrats.
You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to and watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm your host, Kerry Lutz. Got an amazing guest for you today. It is a site that I follow virtually daily, certainly every week, several times, Mises.org. And there you can find the teachings and the expansion of Ludwig von Mises's theories, not just theories, but observations and proof that free markets work best. And truly the government that governs best is that which governs least. Tom DiLorenzo, you are president of Mises, and I'm amazed like how relevant and how many young people have kind of come over to the site and the libertarian mindset. And in the current political environment, it seems like more and more people are gravitating towards it. They get it.
Yeah, we have more than 3 million readers a year of our website, Mises.org. And the free books we have that can be downloaded, like Human Action by von Mises and Man, Economy, and State by Murray Rothbard, are downloaded 30 or 40,000 times a month, every month, all year long, year in and year out. And we have some videos that have nearly 2 million views of video of just speeches giving at some of our conferences. And you might remember, Kerry, when Ron Paul, who's been on our board for 40 years, was running for the Republican nomination. He went to Michigan State University to give a talk, and he thought it was going to be all very antagonistic. And the students started spontaneously chanting, "End the Fed," because they had heard Ron say that, and they had read up on it, probably on our website, because he talks about our website all the time. And he's a good friend of ours. He was just here several months ago giving a talk. And so, yeah, a lot of young people, and we have a big network of professors all over the world who turn their students on to our writings and our programs. And so we're sort of missionaries in that regard, and we love it when we discover smart young people who are interested in our ideas.
So to sum up, Austrian School of Economics, for those of you out there who aren't familiar with it, just give us a brief encapsulation of the most important points of it.
Well, it uses economic theory and to understand human behavior in general. We call it human action in general, and we study markets, and we teach and we do research on how markets actually work and how they work much better than government. And we have a lot of literature on why government seems to fail at everything it does. I used to have a sticker on my office door that I clipped out of a newspaper by Ringo Starr, of all people. And it said, "Everything government touches turns to crap." And that's sort of one of the themes of the Austrian School, but it's based on 150 years of research by some pretty serious scholars. But in layman's term, that's pretty much it.
Well, I would just add to Ringo Starr's wisdom and say, if it doesn't turn to crap, then it goes up in flames.
Yeah, that would be especially appropriate today, wouldn't it, for Californians?
So perfect example. This wasn't really on our list of things to talk about, but it really is dominating the news cycle now. Perfect example of governmental failure at every single level. The fires going on in California now, right?
Yeah. I published an article on LouRockwell.com, which I'm a columnist for. Lou was the founder of the Mises Institute, entitled "California Bad Dreamin'." And one of the points I made is that I quoted former New York Mayor Ed Koch, who once said, "It's hard to hold a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new sewer line." And the point he was making is that people were complaining, why is the infrastructure crumbling in New York City? Well, there's not much political hay to be made by opening up a new sewer line or a new water line or making sure the water hydrants work for fires, because there are so many other opportunities to spend tax dollars that will win more votes and more campaign contributions in other ways. And doing the fundamental things that governments are supposed to do, like keeping the infrastructure for firefighting intact, is not politically profitable compared to other things. So that's why this happened. I don't think it's unique at all to Los Angeles. I think every city has the same problem, and they deal with it, and some deal with it better than others. But the wacky politicians in California are among the worst and the stupidest. And so look what happened. I used to live in Maryland, and I always told people the Maryland left is probably the dumbest of all the leftists politicians anywhere in America.
That's saying a lot.
More than Louisiana, but I might have to change that to California after this.
Hey, and look, like we could argue anarcho-capitalism and, limited government, but the states that don't have income taxes, by definition, are more limited in their scope than the states that do. And the states that don't have income taxes, like Florida, Texas, the 9 states that are out there, have all grown much faster. And yet, like when there's a hurricane in Florida, whether you think the government should be addressing it or not, that's what happens. DeSantis and his predecessor, Rick Scott, and his predecessor, Jeb Bush, that was when they were at their best in a disaster. They were at their best. No, they weren't like rebuilding the bridges themselves, but they were there making sure that the people who they appointed to get this stuff done were getting it done. Newsom, he's like out there like in the wild. You get no confidence from the guy. He looks completely lost. I mean, he makes a deer in headlights look confident.
Yeah. Yeah, well, with the state income tax, the politicians can play Santa Claus. They have so much money that they're Santa Claus. They can become popular, and that's why Newsom is popular. He has so much money. Even like the mayor of Los Angeles was spending. They had transgender cafe, things like that. Any special interest group with who wants anything at all, if you have income tax revenue, no problem. But if you're restricted, like Florida, if you want to succeed as a governor or in general as a politician, you darn well better make sure you're prepared for hurricanes in Florida, because that's the one thing that's going to get you kicked out of office. But in California, they have so much money, they just enjoy playing Santa Claus. And like Mel Gibson said when he was interviewed after he lost his home, Laura Ingraham asked him if he had anything he'd like to say to Governor Newsom, and he said, "Yeah, use less hair gel." So that's the advice he had for him. Yeah.
Talk about the blow-dried politician. Yeah. So this brings us to now. Many of you out there, you and I, Tom, believe that the economy is in far worse condition than we've been gaslit to believe. I mean, literally, the past 4 years, and politicians in general, it's all about gaslighting. It's all about making you believe a reality that doesn't exist, that is more favorable to them to believe. And I would go back to Trump's first term. The Democrats don't have a monopoly on gaslighting, but the reality is inflation's way worse. Employment is way worse. All the metrics they use are distorted. I mean, Murray Rothbard always used to say government shouldn't bother with statistics because they just use it as an excuse to meddle in the economy.
That's right. I've actually, in my younger days, when I was early in my career, and I was at George Mason University outside of D.C. I was asked to testify at congressional hearings once in a while by the Heritage Foundation back in the day. And they all want a statistic of some kind. I was impressed that they all wanted us to give them some kind of number that they would think it would make them be authoritative in whatever they wanted to do. And that's the racket of the statistics. And they keep, when the statistics turn bad from their perspective, they change the definition. Like they change the definition of inflation. They don't count gas prices and food. Who cares about that? How much money do you spend on food anyway? It's irrelevant. And so shadowstats.com computes inflation the way they did in the 1980s, and inflation is probably 3 or 4 or 5 times more than what the government today says it is. And then all of these jobs that they brag about, a big chunk of them are government make-work jobs, so they're not real private sector productive jobs. So they lie about unemployment also. But I think that's going to turn around because these agencies like the Department of Labor and the Department of Commerce, they're all like 90, 95%, 99% Democrats who work there. There was a study of the Fed recently by the Independent Institute in Oakland, California. And like the board of governors of the Fed, I think they're among the staffers. I think there was 97 Democrats and 3 Republicans.
Oh,
and so now that Trump is going to be president, that's going to turn around. I think they're going to be more realistic. And inflation, they're going to report higher inflation numbers and higher unemployment numbers, which really existed during the Biden administration, but they lied about that because they're Democrats and then Biden was their guy. And that's what I think is going to happen.
So now it looks like, the most amazing thing, Trump gets elected first president to serve non-consecutive terms since Grover Cleveland. Yeah. And since they don't study history anymore, nobody really sees the parallels to Cleveland's second term. But there's an opportunity here with Doge between Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and all these things to rethink and redefine government. Now, the last time we really had this situation was when Reagan was elected, and all he wound up doing was maybe slowing down the growth of government a little bit. He was never really successful in cutting spending and really limiting government to the areas where it should be, where it's necessary. And by the way, could you just tell us, Tom, what are the major functions that a government should be performing according to Mises?
Well, Mises was not an anarchist. He believed in limited constitutional government. He was a fan of the U.S. Constitution and the protection of life, liberty, and property is what government, if you're going to have government, that's what should be done. There's a famous old book called The Law by Friedrich Bastiat, who I'm sure you're familiar with. And he has one statement in there, the law perverted. And how is it perverted? Well, if it gets away from protecting life, liberty, and property, and it starts taxing one group in order to buy votes from another group, well, that's the perversion of the law. And so as a start, if you want to know what the legitimate functions of the government are in our system, it's Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that lists what are known as the delegated powers. And they're mostly having to do with foreign policy and war and things like that. Coining money, not printing money, but coining money, deciding who's to be a citizen, things like that. Punishing pirates on the high seas is actually listed in there, counterfeiting, and that's about it. And the judicial system, and also it did not provide for a standing army. The army was to be funded for 2 years at a time under the original Constitution, and so of course that was whittled away at in beginning in George Washington's day, as far as that goes. And it's been largely destroyed since then. But that's what Mises would say is a function of government.
Okay. And then it's just because that gets back to Ringo Starr again. It's that everything the government touches turns to crap. Now, people will point at the railroads, and the highway system and all that as need for government. There is a need. I mean, the interstate highway system, how would it have been built without government involvement?
Yeah. Well, they've all been making that argument for 200 years. And Alexander Hamilton made the argument that we needed government spending for what they called internal improvements. In his day, it was roads and canals. And then when Thomas Jefferson became president, his Treasury Secretary made the same argument. It was basically a free rider argument that you need to force people through taxes to pay for this. But then at the same time, before the 19th century began, there were thousands of miles of private road building. They were called turnpikes, and they were financed by investors. And people had an incentive in the towns in America to connect their town to the next town because it would enrich everybody. If you're a merchant, it would increase the size of your market if you made it easy to do that. And so while these people were complaining that there's a free rider problem, people will not voluntarily pay to build roads. People were voluntary. The people in the towns were investing. They were buying stock in these turnpike companies. And so historically speaking, that's the way it actually happened. But we've forgotten our history. Like you said, no one studies history anymore. And the interstate system is not an unequivocal blessing anyway. There are a lot of people who think they'd rather have their privacy and not rather have crowds from all over the planet driving through their cities and urban sprawl and all that people complain about. So there are people who complain about that eminent domain. They've stolen property from so many people to build all these roads. And so there is a case for private road building. And you do see some people now privatizing some roads and turning them into toll roads in Los Angeles and places like that. But so, yeah, you could have certain things like that. You can make an argument that that's a function of government, but that's it. You can't make an argument that the transvestite cafe is a constitutional function of government that taxpayers should be forced to pay for.
Wasn't there an amendment about that recently, I thought?
Probably in the California Constitution, there probably was.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. So, Doge, imagine, we have like 800 agencies and they bring it down to 100 agencies. We still got all the debt. There's not much they can do about that other than Martin Armstrong had the best solution that I've heard, which is do a debt to equity swap where you just say, here's a coupon, you could buy stocks with it, and that's all you could do, nothing else.
Yeah.
And because otherwise the choice is to default. And, all sorts of bad things happen then, even though inflation is a form of defaulting on your obligations.
Yes. Yeah, I'm optimistic about Elon Musk and Vivek and the Doge thing because, like Robert Kennedy Jr. also said, if he gets in, he wouldn't have the authority to abolish the FDA. But there are a lot of subdivisions at the FDA that he thinks have been harmful to Americans for decades. And he could abolish them without the whole agency. And every American business spends a significant part of their day complying with regulations instead of producing things. And if there could be just a 10% cut, or look at it the other way, a 10% increase in the time American businesses spend actually being productive, that's a huge increase in productivity, just 10%. And 20% would be a boom. You increasing what else in the world? The invention of the personal computer might be a comparison to what would boost productivity, and on the same level of a 20% cut in wasted time kowtowing to faceless bureaucrats 1,000 miles away. And so I'm optimistic about that.
Yeah. And combine that with AI, which is really having a profound impact. I mean, just little things that I do, like show notes for like this interview will be AI generated in part. You still got to have some involvement and just running a lot of the government on AI. You wouldn't know the difference, right? I figure how much worse can AI be than the bureaucracy?
Yeah, the government, there's so many bureaucrats in the government. It's as though government still runs like a 19th century woolen coat factory where it had a lot of people, sewing the buttons on every little woolen clothes without technology, before technology came along and it eliminated the need for all these people to do all these things. And on technology, too, the government is so bad on technology. We talked earlier about the incentive to not spend that much money, enough money on infrastructure, like fire prevention. Well, here's a fact for you. It was only 2019 that the U.S. government, quit using 8-inch floppy disks in the 1970s for its nuclear arsenal, the nuclear power, nuclear bombs.
I did read that. Oh my God.
Yeah. And that's not just an isolated example. It's the same phenomenon that, it's more politically profitable for the politicians to spend money on other things than things that actually help us.
My kids don't even know what a floppy disk is.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I never encountered the joys of having a stack of the things, and you load your programs in. And, I go back to the early days of the PC. And pretty amazing. So we're at a unique time. And the fact is, the change has to come. Either the change is going to happen on its own and could be totally unmanageable, or we basically open things up and we embrace the change. I hate to use cliches like that. The only constant in life is change, right?
Yeah.
But we have to do something here because we're failing, right?
Yeah. Well, Friedrich Hayek once said in one of his books, Law, Legislation, and Liberty, that the thing about economic growth is that when your time comes to change, say that, a product that you're working for a company, the product has become outdated. If you want a prosperous society, you have to accept that and adapt. If you don't want to accept that and adapt, then you're going to give up prosperity. And Americans need to be taught that so that they realize that there's a benefit to adapting, that you have a more prosperous life and a better life, and your children and grandchildren will have a better life if you adapt to these changes, and because it's going to be for the better. And so I'm a bit optimistic. The fact that the left is becoming more and more hysterical, and they seem so defeated, and the wokeism is sort of fading. It'll go back to the universities where it came from for now, but it's like a cancer. It'll be at the universities, but it'll still be growing there, and we'll see what will happen in the next 20 years. Maybe I won't see what happened in the next 20 years, but somebody will. That's the way it's going to go. Yeah,
it's on the wane, and they call it the woke mind virus. Yeah. And it's interesting, Tom. Anyone whose job or business or livelihood is threatened, quickly becomes a Luddite, right?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because my business, my industry, my job is valuable. People need it. They just don't know how much we need it. But that force of creative destruction is key to moving forward. We look that where self-driving vehicles, I'll just kind of cut it off at this, but 10 million people, it's the largest job category in the United States, driver.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you from my latest experiences driving Teslas, it's not going to be long before those people are surplus.
Oh, yeah.
They're not going to be needed. It's certainly a large number of them. There might be instances where you want the car not driving itself, but
yeah,
we're almost there. And we'll see how quickly society adapts to this, because this is major. And that's just one small example, or one large example of the change that's coming towards us. Factory work, robotics, another one. That's going to be, and it's going to happen so fast. It's happening now so quickly that most of you out there don't even know it's happening.
Yeah, well, we adapted pretty well when we went from horses to automobiles, and well, hopefully we'll do the same thing. And they've been using robotics for decades now. The car companies, back in the old days, people had to stick their arms into a moving assembly line with sharp pieces of metal going past, and then they use robotic arms to do all that now. So that's really nothing new. We've been doing that for a long time. And it's historically what always happens with technology like that is that new types of jobs are created. When they got rid of operators, I'm old enough to remember long distance telephone service. You had to call and you talk to somebody. And AT&T hired millions of operators, and they would connect you to your long distance call. And the AT&T unions thought this would be a disaster. Direct dialing telephone would be a disaster, but they'd expanded the telephone business so much that they ended up having more union members and not fewer union members after direct dialing for long distance. And that's always been the history of technological advance. But people need to understand that, and they need to adapt. And the sooner you adapt, the better, of course.
Yeah, can you actually dial 0 and get an operator now? I don't think you can do it.
I don't think so. I don't think you can.
And that was everybody did that, and then collect calls and information. So information's gone. I don't know. Can you call 411 and actually? I think it's all robotic automation anyway.
Up to someone from Pakistan if you do that. I have an older relative. She's passed away now, but she was an operator, and I've been to her workplace when I was young, and they had all these women. There's like hundreds of them, all like a telemarketing place, but it was AT&T.
Oh yeah, it's huge. Well, we call them now call centers. And things like the typing pool. Remember, like companies would have like 100 lists, and those are gone.
Yeah.
And Wall Street's back office, like they used to manually handle share transfers, accrued interest, accrued dividends, actually on adding machines.
Yeah.
Up until the early 60s when the calculator came out. That was a big innovation. And now, basically, there is no back office of Wall Street. It's all big boxes, computers.
Sure. Yeah. We could probably cite 1,000 examples like that, but people need to know these things that we've been pretty good at adapting to these over the years. We still have an economy, and we still have the prospects for prosperity, but you need to learn that lesson. And there are a lot of people who just think, I'll never get another job for the rest of my life. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania during the steel era in the 60s and 70s, and when the steel mills all disappeared. But Pittsburgh today is a very, very different place. The types of businesses are totally different, and they succeeded. It was painful at the beginning, but it didn't take Pittsburgh very long to shift to the new economy.
Hey, well, we go back to the Luddites. Really, they were the first recorded instance of anti-tech, anti-progress, if you will, and they were smashing the looms because it automated the drudgery of making cotton and wool, and it was a big movement in the 19th century, and now that's all automated. So
the dock workers today are complaining about automation because there's a lot of automation coming along with taking stuff off of the ships, the dock workers. And Trump seems to be sympathetic to them, but they're Luddites, basically. Yeah, they don't want to see the automation of some of their work either. And it's pretty.
The container, the container totally revolutionized that industry, but there still is the longshoreman. Well, Tom, really appreciate you coming back on. Like I say, I can't say enough good things about Mises.org. I have referred countless people to the site to try to get them to open up, to get you to open up, to understand the way the economy really works, which is, like you said, it comes down to human action, people acting in their own self-interest, whatever that might be, hopefully within the confines of the law, to further their economic and their families' economic position. It's really that simple when you get down to it.
It is.
But when it's billions of people doing it all at the same time, it gets very complicated very quickly. And, the greatest force for change is unleashing the human mind and allowing you to pursue your best interests. So Mises.org, link is in the show notes to this interview on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Tom, appreciate it. Welcome here anytime. And we will talk to you again soon.
Okay, Kerry, have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.